Hey everybody, it's Rick. Welcome back to the channel. Today we are diving into the magical world of watercolor pencils and how they can elevate your card making to new heights. So let's jump into it and we're going to get started right now. Alright, for my card today I'm using the Exotic Tuber Rose stamp set from Altenew. It just came out. We're using the Artistico watercolor pencils, and my inspiration came from, our color palette came from the Color Cube. This is card number 302. I'm going to stamp my images out first, and you want to use a waterproof ink since this is a water media. So the Nocturne Versafine Clair ink is perfect for that. I'm going to actually double stamp this. I've got it in my Misty. I'm going to reposition my stamp set and add my little bird in from the Exotic Tuber Rose stamp set. And you think I could remember this name of the stamp set, but I can't. It is what it is. So we're going to stamp that in that same ink on some Canson XL watercolor paper that I've cut down to A6 card size. And that is, let me grab my notes here. The watercolor cardstock is cut down to, where'd it go? 4 by 5 3/4 is what that's cut to. So we're going to jump into this coloring, and you want to start using your watercolor pencils. I like to go heavy first and then go out with a lighter hand. I like to build up the color. You're going to use them just the same as you would a regular color pencil to start off. So that's why I like to go ahead and just start building up my color layers. It gets a little tricky with watercolor pencils because they can go awry, but we'll get to that later. So I'm adding in a light amount of color to start with, and I'm going to build up that intensity of the color. In the video, I do actually show you one point where we are doing the coloring in, well, actually, I just did. I just showed you the coloring in real time. I'm actually going to show you the painting in real time. I did speed this up because it took me over an hour and a half, almost 2 hours to do this card, the coloring and everything. So it's a little long. So make sure you're watching, you grab a cup of coffee and relax, or soda or whatever. I've got my Diet Coke, so we're good. All right, so I'm going to continue adding in my pigment. This is how I always start out. You want to add, with your watercolor pencils, you want to add at least 2 layers. One, you're going to do the dry I'm doing right now to color the entire process. You can blend your colors like I'm doing right now with 2 different pencils or 3 different pencils just by adding in another layer of the color. But you can see in the coloring process how I'm starting heavier and then building out that lighter, getting lighter as I go out. As we get to the background, I'll show you a different technique to use with that. So we're just going to finish filling up the pigment, and I'm going to work on my greens. For that, I am using, and again, I'm using the Artistico Premium, what are they called? Artistico Premium watercolor pencils. I got these off of Amazon. They're a great budget-friendly pencil. I think they're like $20, $25, something like that. It was 72 pencils, and I was very surprised at how well these actually worked for a budget-friendly pencil. Some of the other ones I bought, not so great, but I'm doing that same thing with the, this is called the Forest Green. Forest Green is A558. They're not available open stock. You have to buy the set. And I'm also using, this is Primary Honey Orange is what that yellow color is. So you can't go by the color of the pencil. You have to go really by the color of the lead. That's another little trick. For my orange that I'm coloring the bird, I'm using Mars Red. And you can see that does not look red. It's orange. Even my red that I'm using for some shadows, it's called Sun Red. It's more on the red-orange side. But I'm using that. And I'm adding some of that yellow honey orange in there. We're going to go ahead and call it yellow. For my gray here, I'm using Gray Stone. I've only used 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 pencils for this entire card. and I just built up the layers. You can see me adding in a different, the intensity of the color right there on that gray. I also do that same thing on the wings. That's how I like to start. I like to start at the shadow areas and pull it out so I get it a little darker, and then pull out to my lighter color. That's just how the way I like to do it. You can totally start like just light and then build up your color. I just prefer to do it the way I'm doing it. I did add a little bit of that Mars red into the red sun into the belly of the bird. Now I'm working on the background, and I'm just going to scribble some color in there. I'm using that forest green to scribble off a atmospheric background. I'm going to add a little bit of that honey orange in there, which is my yellow color. I'm also going to add some of the red sun in there because I want it to look like the background's out of focus and there's more of the tuberoses back there. So I'm just going to scribble those colors in. I kind of put, because the yellow is more of on the orange side, I do add a little bit of that green in there and close to the red. Even with the red, there's so much orange in that red, it's not going to make really a brown. I added some of the gray into the background of the sky, and then this is where I'm going to pull in the two blues. And for that, I am using sapphire blue and lagoon blue is my lightest color. This is sapphire blue I'm coming over that gray with right now. So as you can see, I'm just kind of scribbling color down, and the background doesn't have to have a lot of pigment on it. You want enough that you're going to fill up a little bit of the tooth. I'm using the back side of the Canson XL, so it's not as textural as the front. This is the lagoon blue. It's the lighter blue. And it just allows me to get enough pigment on there that I can move it around with a little bit of water. Now, once we start the color, the transformation process is what we're going to call it. Right here, you can see me dipping my brush onto the paper towel. I'm using a number 2 Princeton Heritage round brush. I like the smaller brush for this because it's such a small image. And I start in the lightest area and work my way towards the dark to be able to pull that out. Like I do if you've watched any of my other watercoloring videos, I do that same process with this. I add it to the light first and pull it out. Because with watercolor pencils, this is another big tip. If you start with your darkest color and pull it out towards the light, it's going to cover up the light area. So in order to get that light in there, you've got to start in the lightest area and moisten that pigment. There's very, very little water on the brush. It's just a thirsty brush. Y'all have heard me mention that before. I'll go back to that in just a second. But a thirsty brush, all it is you dip it in the water, you dip your paper towel onto your paper towel, the bristles of the brush, it soaks up most of that water, so it's just super damp. And that's really what you want with your watercolor pencils. You just need enough water on there to be damp that's going to moisten the pigment and allow you to move it around. Now see here on the bird's breast, you can see how I started in the lighter area and then went into the darker and pulled that out a little bit to blend it. That's the whole technique to watercolor pencils. Because it allows you to pull in the colors from the light that you've already applied in the lighter areas, and then pull that darker color from the shadow area, and allows them to blend together. That's the easiest and most effective way you can use your watercolor pencils. It's also a great media that you can add color to your project and get that watercolor look, but still it's in the form of pencil because it is a pigment inside the pencil. And when you add, it's a watercolor pigment, so when you add the water, it acts as a watercolor. So it makes it super easy. And it's a little bit less intimidating than watercolors are. Watercolors can be super intimidating. Now we're going to move on to the leaves. You can really see me doing that technique here. I started in the lightest area and I'm pulling into my darkest and then blending that together. And I'm going to do this a couple times for y'all on camera. And then I will skip ahead to the next section of the flowers. I didn't color the entire thing again on camera for y'all because it took me over 2 hours. I think I had 198 minutes of footage. So to get this down into a manageable size, I had to cut some stuff for y'all. Because I know y'all don't want to watch me talk about this for over an hour. So I'm just going to pull out that leaf color, and you can see how easily the pigment moves around. That's one thing that I really liked about these budget-friendly pencils, because normally they don't move as well as they are. Now we're going to start working on our tuberose. Sorry, I had to get a drink. I'm going to do that same concept. I'm going to pull out. And anytime you see me go to the paper towel, I've already dipped it in my little cup of water that's off to the side. That way, I get that thirsty brush that I really need to move that pigment around. Again, you've got to watch the consistency of the water you use, because if you have too much water, it's going to flood your paper and you're not going to get the result you want. So you want very, very little water when you're using these pencils. But we're going to do that same concept. We're working in the lightest area, blending down into our shadow area, blending those two colors together so that it moistens that pigment and creates that beautiful, beautiful tone and color and value. So we're going to go ahead and pull out this one and then blend that yellow and that red sun together. If I could remember the name of the pencils, it would help. So I'm going to go ahead and finish up those little stems that I forgot. I'm going to do this one right here, and each of the petals, I'm going to come in and start in that light area, pull it out. You can see how I blend it together right there. It's actually a lot easier than you think. You just got to think of it a little bit differently than coloring any other media. Like we're going to start with, we're going to moisten that light first and then blend it out. Because with the watercolor, any water media, anywhere there's water on the paper, it's going to flow into where the water is. That's just the properties of watercolor media. So you can see I was able to lift up a little highlight right there with just that thirsty brush. And then I'm going to finish up these little flowers, and we're going to work on our background in just a second. And that's a little bit, I'm going to give you a close look at the flowers. I'm sorry. So you can see how I pulled out that highlight. But you can see how I'm really using that whole technique with the lightest area and pulling it out. So where I put that yellow, the orange, honey orange in there, that yellow color, and then that mixed with the red sun, you get a beautiful pigment. Now we're going to work on the background. I did switch to a larger brush. I'm using a number 5 round Princeton Heritage brush for the background. And I'm just kind of dabbing the color, the pigment on, the moistened brush onto the pigment, because I want this to have that bokeh effect, so I don't really have to do a lot of blending. I can just move the color around, let it blend by itself. But you're going to see how it creates that bokeh look in the background. It has that blurry effect, like there's more tuberoses back there than what is actually on there that we stamped. This allows us to get that whole very pretty, easy background. And by blending those colors together, it gives you the illusion that there's something else back there that's really not. So it's super easy to do. It's just a matter of that thirsty brush. Remember, that's only got a very little bit of water on it, and you can see how beautiful that's starting to look back there in the background. And anywhere that I put, you can see right there where I mixed that red and that green together, it did not make a true brown. That's what I like about these pencils too. There's a lot of variety in the colors that you don't end up with mud, or as we call it in the art world, a neutral gray, because that's really what it is. If you mixed a complementary color together, pro tip, if you mix a complementary color together with the other complement and you added white to it, you're going to get a gray. It's not technically a brown. So there's that. Now we're going to soften the other part of the sky, the grayish blue color that I added in there. I wanted it to have a nice little hazy feel, so you can see how by that little bit of pigment that I put on there, but then blending those 2 colors, or 3 colors in this case, on top of each other, we create our own color. So that's a great way that you can add to your color range, is by mixing your colors together on the paper. Also, you can mix them on a separate sheet of paper and pick up the pigment and use them as traditional watercolors, which is another thing you can do with your watercolor pencils. I'm trying to look at my notes here. So, As I said, this is cut at 4 by 5 3/4. So we're making an A6 card today, which is a little different size for me. I don't know why I decided to make it. I guess because I saw Jennifer McGuire do it. So I wanted to give it a try because she was like, oh, it's a great card size to do if you want to mix up what you're doing, get a little bit more creative. So I decided to give it a try. You can see how I'm kind of tapping the brush onto the pigment. That's going to create a little bit of texture on there so that it gives me a little bit more atmospheric texture in the background. Kind of gives us a little cloud effect. So I'm just really moving the pigment around. It's just a really good way to do that. And it adds that a little bit of texture to your card when it blends our colors together. All right, so other things you're going to need. You're going to need a watercolor brush. You could use water painters or water aqua brushes. I don't like aqua brushes. I prefer to use just regular Princeton round heritage brushes. I like those. Those are like my favorite. I don't really care for the black velvets. I've never liked them. I bought the whole set and I just didn't like them. So there's that. So, but buy what you like. I know some people like to use a Teflon brush with watercolor pencils. I like the Princeton Heritage. I thought it did really well. So I'm coming in now, and I'm back to the card for a second. I'm going to come in. I forgot my feathers of my birds, the tail feathers. So I'm going to just add that in and moisten that pigment and move it out. So other products you're going to need a cup for water. You're going to need watercolor paper. As far as when I mentioned about putting it on a piece of paper and picking it up, that you could use a piece of paper, a watercolor paper, as a palette, or you could buy a watercolor pencil palette that has texture on it that you can scribble the pencil on and pick up pigment off that. Now, I'm going to come in and I'm doing a different technique here to add my second layer. I've dried everything. I'm actually picking up pigment straight from the pencil and building up my color layers and the intensity. That is one thing you want to do with watercolor pencils. It's not going to be, for the most part, add one application and you're done. You're going to have to build up your color a little bit. So you're going to have to add 2, 3, sometimes even 4 layers of color to get it where you want it. So don't be afraid of drying. Let it dry. Come back adding more pigment. And this is a great way to add pigment in certain areas, is just by picking it up from the tip of the pencil. As you can see, I'm actually going to add the shadows in the same way in just a little bit. So once we get to that, I will talk to you more about that. When you're using your watercolor pencils, as I said, you want to use them in layers. You can use them for blending and shading, which we're going to get to. Actually, we're doing a little bit of shading now, but we're going to do some more intense shading in just a minute. Other techniques that you can use for dimension is you could do the stippling technique. This is that's where you use your pencil wet and you kind of stipple onto the paper. You can also color in a crosshatch fashion. And that's just a fancy term for coloring one way, then coming back with a different color and coloring the other way. I zoomed in a little bit here so I could show you how I added a little bit more detail to the belly of the bird. And I'm just kind of dotting in that Mars red. And this is where I'm coming in with the shadows for the feathers. And I'm going to do it to the flowers also. I'm actually using the tip-to-tip method with the sapphire blue. I picked up just the pigment of the sapphire blue onto my brush, and I'm adding it where my darkest shadows are going to be. Like for underneath this row of feathers here, that's going to be darker than the feathers that's on top of it. So I'm just adding in those shadow colors to give it a little life. And that's one thing I will do a lot is I don't really use black that much. I will use a complementary color or a blue or a violet, some cooler color to add in my shadow colors. That way it keeps it from going too dark too quickly. I really like to do complementary colors together for shadows sometimes because it gives you that really pretty effect of the shadows, but allows you to not go super dark, and it's not going to overpower it. Most of the time when you use the black pencil, it's going to super overpower your image. So I would avoid that at all costs. Now you can see how I'm adding in the tip-to-tip method with the blue shadow on the bird. I'm doing that same thing with these petals that are behind or any petal that is overlapping another petal. I'm still using that same concept with that sapphire blue pencil. Adding in that shadow color. Sorry, I needed a drink. I know I start coughing when I do voiceovers. You can tell I'm really excited about teaching y'all these techniques today. So we're just going to work through our shadow areas. Anywhere that something's overlapping or might have a cast shadow on it, I've added those in with that blue pencil and with the tip-to-tip method. I also encourage you to experiment with different pressure levels to achieve varying intensity of the colors. That's what we talked about before. That's super important to remember. You can, if you want to, like if you wanted a white border around this, you could tape it down to your hardboard or your glass mat or something with some low-tack tape to tape it down. I find that with the amount of water that I'm putting on a watercolor pencil piece, I really don't have to tape it down. So I don't really worry too much about that, as you can see in the demonstration. Now, watercolor pencils are a little different than traditional colored pencils because they do have that, the pigment in it is a water-based pigment. So it will reactivate with water, where traditional colored pencils do not, even though some budget-friendly colored pencils will react with water. I mean, it is what it is. That's what you get when you buy a budget pencil sometimes. So there's that. The uniqueness of the watercolor pencils is that you are able to build up colors. You're able to get that watercolor look without a lot of struggle with watercolors. Because I'm going to tell you from experience, I struggled with learning watercolors for many, many years until I figured it out. And I just had to keep practicing and do it because they were bad, y'all. I'm just going to tell you, they were bad. I avoided them for years. And finally, it just clicked one day, and I just was able to do it. Now I'm going to stamp my sentiment. I'm going to use that same VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink, and I'm just stamping hello on the front. I do end up stamping it twice. And then we're going to stamp the inside of our card. I'm going to put the tuberose on the inside, and I'm going to use... I started out using squeezed lemonade and then switched to mustard seed distress oxide ink for the inside. I wanted to be able to write over it, but I wanted something pretty on the inside also. So the stamp set was the perfect choice for that. So if you're enjoying this video, make sure you leave a comment what you learned, one tip that you learned down below. And if you want to see more card videos with watercolor pencils, make sure you leave that below because I will be happy to do that for y'all. But I'm not going to know unless you leave it, or the analytics tell me that y'all enjoy it. But comments are the best way to do that, and sharing the video. Now we've matted that onto a piece of 4.5 by 6 1/4 inch. Sorry, that's wrong. It is 4 1/4 by 6 piece of pitch black cardstock. I've added that to my card base, which is at 6 1/4 by 4.5 inch card base, and you do that by cutting it at 6 1/4 by 9, scored at 4.5 to make the A6 card base. Now I'm adding just a little bit of Stardust Stickles just where I wanted a little highlights and a little bit of shine on my project. Y'all know I love me some Stardust Stickles. I think they're fabulous. And we're going to end up adding some of the I believe these are called Summer Sunshine sequins from Simon Says Stamp. And I'm just going to add 3 on the left-hand side of the sentiment, 2 on the right. And you can see one flew off. That's why I was digging for another one, because I lost that one and it was right there on the table. So we're just going to attach those with a little Barely Art glue. And I'm going to add in a little stickles after the glue dried. I added just a little dot of stickles into the center. And there's a look at my card. Here's a closer look at the card. Remember to give this video a thumbs up, leave a comment, like I said, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye, guys. Love you. Stay crafty.